Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable and Lady Gentleman for his point of order, and to the leader for her response. Some members are saying from a sedentary position when. I had intended to say that I expected ministers to comply with the verdict of the House. If the leader wants to offer a further and better particular on that point now, or immediately after the point of order from the Right Honourable Learned Gentleman, she can do so. But if not, I would certainly expect to have fuller information on that matter provided to the House very soon. But first of all, the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman. Keir Starmer.
Point of order, and on that question, could the Speaker please advise me what steps we can take to ensure that the process just outlined is completed by next Tuesday when we vote?
Well, it would seem to me to be unimaginable that it would not be. Unimaginable that it would not be. But, of course, I will hear from the leader.
The government will respond tomorrow, Mr. Speaker.
I'm extremely grateful to the leader for the clarity of that confirmation. And I think that does satisfy the curiosity of members. And we can
developments here in the House of Commons at Westminster. What's happened is that the government has now listened to the view of the House and has backed down, in effect, and will publish in full the legal advice given by the Attorney-General to the government on this Brexit deal that the Prime Minister will be presenting again to the House this evening. Ministers did not want to reveal this advice in full. They had resisted it, but they have now been forced by the House of Commons to accept that it will be published. And as we heard there from the Speaker, rather pointedly, he expects this to be published before that big vote takes place next week. And the Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom, making clear that there would be a statement tomorrow just clarifying the timing. Vicky Young is still with us, and Vicky, we have to underline how significant that decision is.
Yeah, I mean, it seems incredibly significant that after all of that the government has decided to back down, which begs the question why they just didn't do it in the first place. They made their arguments very strongly, saying it was setting a precedent that future governments would not want to go along with, because they feel that ministers and the government should be allowed to have confidential legal advice from their most senior lawyer, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be chaired. Now, she did talk about, Andrea Leadsom, the Leader of the House, referring it to a Privileges Committee. That's the Privileges Committee. Now, whether she means before they publish, because she says she's concerned about the precedent that it is setting. And it was interesting that earlier, Ken Clarke, the father of the House, the most experienced MP in there, he talked about this compromise, a sensible compromise, he put it, whereby MPs could read the legal advice on Privy Council terms. That effectively means privately. Now, whether that is a route they're still going to go down or not, I don't know. It didn't seem like it. Andrea Leadsom saying we will publish, but she has put in that caveat there of saying she'll refer it to the Privileges Committee. So we'll have to speak to the government to find out what exactly they mean by that.
But the potential implications, Vicky, are enormous, aren't they? Because there was clearly a huge amount of sensitivity around this legal advice, and ministers, citing all kinds of reasons, including national security, were obviously worried about the consequences. Let's go back to the House for a second.
Delivers on the Brexit priorities that this country voted for. And the debate and the vote ahead of us are the next crucial steps we must take to make sure we deliver on the whole of the referendum and in the best interests of the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister's proposal delivers on all of those things that those who voted to leave the European Union were looking for, Mr. Speaker. That means we are taking back control of our borders, our laws and our money. We are leaving the common agricultural policy and leaving the common fisheries policy, and importantly, the United Kingdom will be able to undertake free trade agreements with the rest of the world, which in many places is growing far faster than economies in the European Union. At the same time, the Prime Minister's proposal seeks to ensure that we continue with a deep and special relationship with our EU friends and neighbours, not only for economic trade, but also in security and in other areas that are of great value to all of our nations. Mr. Speaker, this has been a challenging journey, and compromises have had to be made on all sides. However, two things are certain. First, that the Prime Minister's deal is the only deal on the table. and second, that it means we will leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019.
On a point of order, Mr. Kevin Brennan.
To do with the business of the House.
Well, I think I'm most grateful to the honourable gentleman. I think that the Leader of the House is providing the context for what she intends to say. But, well, the Honourable Lady for Great Grimsby is in an animated state and expressing through wild gesticulation her dissatisfaction with that state of affairs. But I think a modest forbearance would be seemly. The Leader of the House.
Well, I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to set the context. Think of it as perhaps an introduction. So, I believe that the withdrawal agreement and political declaration offer the route to a good future relationship with our European friends and neighbours, and therefore I believe we must support the deal and continue our efforts to deliver on the will of the people of the United Kingdom. So before my right honourable friend opens the meaningful vote debate itself, this motion first seeks to set the framework within which that debate will take place. The government has listened carefully to views right across the House on how best to govern the arrangements for the debate on the withdrawal agreement and the future framework. I'm grateful to colleagues on all sides for the collaborative discussions that have taken place in advance of tabling the motion on the order paper today. I'm also very grateful for the contributions of the select committees of this House, whose views and recommendations have been insightful indeed. And I pay particular tribute to the Exiting the European Union Committee, chaired by the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central, and the Procedure Committee, chaired by my honourable friend, the Member for Broxbourne, on the procedure in the House that ought to apply to this unique debate. The Government has carefully considered the Procedure Committee's recommendations in bringing forward today's Business of the House motion. I hope that the House agrees that the motion on the order paper today is reflective of the vast majority of recommendations in that report. The parameters for this debate will enable what the committee itself called a momentous decision for Parliament and for the country. It's absolutely vital that we make sure the substantive issues are properly debated so that members of the House can take an informed decision in the national interest. To turn briefly to the amendments in the name of the Honourable Member for Eltham, I would gently say to the Honourable Member and to the House that the motion in the Prime Minister's name, as tabled, provides for a full 5 days of debate, as recommended by the Exiting the European Union Committee and the Procedure Committee, following their consultations and evidence taken across the House on what provision should best govern proceedings. The time frame being provided strikes the optimal balance between ensuring full and proper scrutiny and debate on such an important decision and vote, and allowing the time for the legislation that will give effect to that decision to pass through Parliament by the 29th of March 2019. The Government has been determined to make sure that the House is able to carry out full scrutiny and play its essential role as we move towards leaving the EU, and the motion tabled reflects that. Should the House agree the Business of the House motion today, the 5 days of debate ahead of us build upon the many important opportunities the House has had to consider EU exit so far. We have had 37 days of debate as Parliament agreed the EU Withdrawal Act. There have been regular statements and opportunities to question ministers, including over 10 hours at the dispatch box by my right honourable friend the Prime Minister in just the last 20 days alone.
Andrea Leadsom, the Leader of the House of Commons, just setting out the context of the debate that is now going to begin. There is some discussion, of course, about what might happen in the event of a loss for the government next Tuesday, but we're not there yet. 5 days of debate starting today. now that we've had some of the turbulence for the last couple of hours, with the government being heavily criticised for not releasing its legal advice in full. It'll now have to do so. It's been compelled to do so by the House of Commons in the past 20 minutes. What I want to do is step out of the chamber, into the lobby, into the central lobby of the Houses of Parliament, because waiting for us there is the Northern Ireland Secretary, Karen Bradley. Secretary of State, thanks for waiting patiently to talk to us. Can I have your reaction, first of all, to the verdict of the House on the legal advice that you as Cabinet members have seen?
Well, clearly it's disappointing that the House has taken this decision. I think it's unprecedented. The Attorney General yesterday gave a statement to the House for over 2 hours. He answered questions and made himself available to all members of the House and gave very frank and very candid answers in an unprecedented step, actually. It's highly unusual for an Attorney General to make that kind of statement to the House, but clearly the House has spoken. The Leader of the House has said that the government will listen and we will publish the advice in the next 24 hours. But I think, importantly, we're now moving on to this debate. We've got 5 days for MPs to consider the position, and I think the time is now for cool heads, for real consideration of the implications of the vote next week, because I want to see us deliver on the vote of the British people. I want us to see us leave the European Union on the 29th of March next year in an orderly way. There is only one way we're going to do that, and that is by backing this deal.
Just to be clear on the timing, Karen, because you just mentioned that in the next 24 hours, you say this will be published, the legal advice in full.
Well, the Leader has just said that the advice will be published tomorrow, so I can't tell you exactly when that will be. Okay. That is the information that has just been given to the House of Commons.
That's interesting. And what do you think about the potential effect on the mindset of MPs when they see that advice in full? You are in the position where you have seen it in full, in all of its sensitivity, and I'm just wondering, what could you say to our viewers about the likely impact it'll have?
Well, I think people need to wait and see it. Like I say, the Attorney gave a very full statement yesterday to the House. He took questions from across the floor and he gave very candid and very frank answers, and he didn't shy away from the legal position. What I would say, though, is as a Cabinet Minister, having considered the advice, considered the legal position, I believe the safeguards that are in place, the way that we can unilaterally as the United Kingdom deal with a number of the concerns that people have, that I believe that this deal overall delivers on the result of the referendum. It does deliver on taking back control of our laws, our borders, our monies, in a way that safeguards jobs, safeguards our security. And I think people need to listen to their constituents, listen to people up and down the country. I know as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland that I hear from people all the time saying they just want us to get on with this, they want us to deliver the deal. Of course they want to know the safeguards are in place, and those safeguards are in place, but they also want us to get on and deliver. They do not want this government to let down, and this Parliament to let down the British people who voted so decisively to leave the European Union. That's what I'm determined we will do.
There's another piece of business before the debate begins, Secretary of State. As you well know, your colleague, former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, is attempting to change the standing orders of the House so that the House of Commons, in effect, can be in a position where it can instruct the government what to do if there is a defeat for Mrs May next Tuesday and then she comes back with another plan. Is that your understanding of it, and how would you explain what the attempt is?
There's an amendment, and you're right to say there are some interpretations around it. I think let's listen to what Dominic Grieve has to say about his amendment and how he describes it. I'm looking forward to listening to his explanation, but I would say that the government is putting 5 days of debate forward. We are giving people, all MPs, an opportunity to debate this. Time for cool heads, time for people to consider the position, time to think overall about delivering on the vote of the British people in an orderly way. There is only one way to do that. That is by this deal, by voting for this deal. There is no other guarantees under any other option.
It's a very challenging political landscape that all politicians are in now, Secretary of State, but of course in government it's a very different place. You know the Prime Minister very well. How would you describe the Prime Minister's mindset right now?
The Prime Minister is a woman who acts in the national interest. That's what she always does. She always put public service and the country first, and that is what she continues to do. That's why she has worked tirelessly to get to the point where we have a deal to withdraw from the European Union in a way that is good for the whole United Kingdom, so that we can leave the European Union as the United Kingdom together. Untangling 45 years of economic and regulatory relationship was never going to be easy, but this is the Prime Minister who has put the country first. will continue to do that and will continue to deliver. And I say to my colleagues and my friends in the House of Commons, listen to your constituents, listen to people on the street, spend some time over the weekend meeting people, listen to the people that I meet in Northern Ireland who are saying we want to deliver on this, we want this deal, we want to get on and deliver Brexit and move to the next stage of our relationship with the European Union and our opportunities for the United Kingdom on the global stage.
When you present that message to your colleagues, there are dozens of them, as you know better than anyone, who think that the compromises are just too excessive, that the Prime Minister has given far too much ground to the EU and they're not in a position where they think this deal is a good deal for the country. Now, what do you say to your colleagues privately when they convey that to you?
Well, privately, I'm not speaking privately, am I? I'm on a television camera in front of lots of people. But what I say is that actually, you know, I keep hearing this criticism. The journalists put this to me all the time. Oh, you've given too much away. Well, hang on. The European Union wanted over £100 billion from us. That is not the situation. We've been accused throughout that we are giving away to the European Union. A few months ago, you would have told me that there was no way we would have a deal that had any form of customs arrangement that had a separate customs arrangement for Northern Ireland. That is not what's on the table now. This is a deal. This is a good deal for the United Kingdom that will mean we deliver on the referendum result. And I say to my colleagues, look at this in the round, look at the whole thing, look at the future, look at the opportunities for us, and let's get on and deliver what the British people, the people of the United Kingdom, asked us to deliver on the 23rd of June 2016.
Karen Bradley, good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Secretary of State for Northern Ireland there, Karen Bradley. We're going to go back into the House in a second. It's very important what's happening in there right now. Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General Conservative, who is presenting a motion to the House. Before this debate starts, debate hasn't even started yet. Prime Minister isn't even in the chamber yet. 5 days of debate, which we're expecting, hasn't got underway. There is this crucial contribution by Mr Grieve, which is all about trying to get more powers, if you like, for the House of Commons to instruct the government to behave in a certain way if this deal doesn't go through next week. That's the kind of sequence we're in. Let's go back into the chamber. The Speaker's just taking a point of order, but I think Mr Grieve is on his feet again.
Mr Speaker, the amendments
just a point of order.
I put down the table with my honourable friends speak for themselves. They are there just to introduce more flexibility into the timing of our debates so that backbench MPs can get their thoughts and views down on record.
An argument about how the debate will run.
House, members who are called in the tail end of debates, their time is cut to either 3 or 4 minutes for a speech. It's barely as long as a press release, and they're often discouraged from taking interventions, which really turns this chamber into a recording studio of a series of statements. And I think that would be unfortunate that in a debate of this importance if that were to happen. So I would ask the government to bear that in mind as this debate goes on and not deny backbenchers the chance to put their views on record. But I will not be dividing the House on my amendments, Mr Speaker, but I think the point is made.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman who's made his intentions clear. Sir Oliver Letwin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My right honourable friend and I have not always agreed as we've gone through the process of the lengthy discussions that there have been of the Brexit process. But we did both appear before the Procedure Committee about the proceedings that we're now about to undertake. And when he and I and others came to discuss the effects of Section 13, in which many of us were involved in trying to find compromises that would make it all workable, it became clear that there is a significant issue. And I want to explain to those of my honourable friends and those on other benches who may think that this is an abstruse amendment just why it is actually utterly critical, or may become utterly critical.
Sir Oliver Letwin and Dominic Grieve sitting right next to him was part of this motion as well.
Section 13(8) of the Withdrawal Act, it specifies that if by the 21st of January, whoever is then the Prime Minister of whatever is then the government, and I hope it will be the current Prime Minister of the current government, may be compelled to come to the House of Commons and explain that they believe it is impossible to reach an agreement with the EU. And Section 13(8) then specifies that a motion should be put to the House, and I quote it from section 8b(1), in neutral terms. Now, this is a very strange and arcane parliamentary term, but it has a meaning, and the meaning is specified in section 24b of the Standing Orders of the House of Commons, which ludicrously in our unwritten constitution was described by Bagehot correctly as the nearest thing we have to a constitution. And what section 24b of the Standing Orders say is, and I quote, where, in the opinion of the Speaker or the Chair, a motion that this House, or as the case may be the committee, has considered the matter, is expressed in neutral terms, no amendments to it may be tabled. What this amendment, which my right honourable friend and I and others have put forward, would do is to cancel the Standing Order 24b as it would then apply, so that the House would have a chance to amend the motion put by a government which had concluded that it could not reach a deal with the EU.
And that's seen by some as a kind of instruction to the government.
Be in any way relevant to our proceedings, because many of us hope, I shall be voting for the government's deal on Tuesday, many of us hope the government will reach a deal. Many of us hope that even if we don't reach it on Tuesday, we will reach it subsequently under the guidance of the government. In some way or another, I personally believe that under those circumstances, a sort of Norwegian arrangement is probably the next best step. But whatever we may or may not do, we could arrive on the 21st of January with a statement that no deal can be reached, and it could be that at that time there is across this House somewhere a majority in favour of some solution which would avoid us leaving without a deal. And for those of us who believe that leaving without a deal would be a catastrophe for our country, it seems right that we should at least have the chance to crystallise and express that majority should it arise. And the only way of doing that is to provide for the motion to be amendable. And that is the reason for this amendment.
So it sounds very technical, and it is, but it's potentially very significant.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the House, who's always unfailingly courteous, and I pay tribute to her for that, has made some preliminary comments, and I feel I must reply to them on behalf of these benches. This deal is not in the interests of the Scots, or indeed of anyone in the United Kingdom. The last 2 years have shown that the promises made by the Leave campaign are undeliverable, and all significant analysis shows that this deal will have a massive hit on the British economy, and in particular on jobs and living standards of all our constituents across these islands. The loss of freedom of movement will in particular impact very heavily on the Scottish economy. So what I would say to the Leader of the House is it's not deal or no deal. There's a third option, and the third option is no Brexit. Today, Mr. Speaker, as has been widely reported, the Advocate General of the Court of Justice of the European Union has given his opinion in the case of Whiteman and others, including myself, against the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. And that preliminary opinion has said that Article 50 can indeed be unilaterally revoked. Now, I wish to suggest, Mr. Speaker, that this ruling might have some impact on today's proceedings, and I'll explain why in a moment. Hopefully I'll get the courtesy of a hearing as others did. But for the moment, I should make very clear that the Scottish National Party will support the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable and Learned Member for Beaconsfield, and we applaud his efforts and the efforts of others to ensure that democracy is not steamrolled by this government, and that Parliament has a meaningful say in relation to what might happen in the future. Otherwise, we are generally happy with the time allocated for the debate, and we are very pleased that the UK Government has paid attention to the letter from the leaders of the opposition parties calling for amendments to be decided on before a final substantive vote, that being the usual practice in this House. However, Mr. Speaker, we do think that the UK Government should really consider pushing back the meaningful vote until we have the final judgment of the Grand Chamber of the Court of Justice of the European Union in the case which I have mentioned. It is no surprise, Mr. Speaker, to the UK Government that this decision is pending, because they have been fighting it tooth and nail for the last 8 months. But I am very proud to say that myself, another Scottish SNP parliamentarian, 2 Scottish Greens and 2 Scottish Labour MEPs have triumphed in getting this case to the Court Justice and the preliminary ruling which the Grand Chamber is likely to follow. And the reason we did that, Mr Speaker, was to make sure that parliamentarians in this House would know when they came to the meaningful vote that it wasn't, as the government would have us believe, deal or no deal, that there's a third option of staying in the European Union on the current terms and conditions, a rather good deal which we currently enjoy. And that's what the Advocate General has said today. In 80% of cases, the court follow him, and we know that the court have said that they will rule quickly, and the word on the street is it will be before Christmas. So I'm saying to the government, will they consider postponing the meaningful vote until we know the decision of the Court of Justice? Because, as I said, it's come as no surprise to them that this decision was pending.
Joanna Cherry of the Scottish National Party referring to that European Court of Justice opinion, which again is seen by many as a very significant one, which they say offers the option to the UK to unilaterally cancel Brexit by cancelling Article 50, but there's a lot of debate around that. Let's pop out into the lobby again, because waiting for us there is the Shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer. Sir Keir, thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Not at all.
What is the significance of the votes we've just had?
Well, it's hugely significant because I think it's a historic first for government ministers to be found in contempt. Frankly, it should never have come to this. An order was made 3 weeks ago that the Attorney General's advice should be disclosed, and the government has simply defied that order. And I don't know what they really expected the House to do, because there's no point in the House passing binding votes and binding orders if the government just says we're not going to comply. So, in a sense, I think it's a great shame that it's got to this.
What is the next step, Sir Keir?
Well, the next step is to see what the government say tomorrow morning. They've just accepted that they are now going to publish the full legal advice. Obviously, what we now want to stop is any suggestion that they'll do so after the vote next Tuesday, because the whole point of seeking this advice is to inform the debate that's just about to start. So we'll see what the government says, but if they are going to suggest that whilst they might publish it will be at some future date, then that's obviously not going to be acceptable.
The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, speaking to us a short while ago, said it was her understanding that the advice would be published within the next 24 hours.
Well, she knows slightly more than I do, but this is the second time Parliament has voted on this. The government's been found to be in contempt of Parliament, and so I think they should publish straight away and within the next 24 hours at the very least.
The assumption in some quarters is that that advice contains information of the kind of sensitivity that will have a big impact on how MPs will view this deal. Is that your thought?
Well, I don't know, because I don't know what's in the advice, but we had a strong debate 3 weeks ago about the rights and wrongs, the exceptional circumstances in which legal advice can be disclosed. And at the end of that debate, the government decided not to oppose the order that this legal advice be disclosed. So we wait and see what's in the advice, and we will then be the wiser about what the government was actually told about the arrangement that it wants other MPs to sign up to.
How sympathetic are you to the other attempts today by Dominic Grieve and others, and we've heard from Hilary Benn too, about changing the way the House works, in effect, just to explain to viewers that might give the House different kinds of powers in the next few weeks and months? What do you think of that?
Well, what's going on here today, whether it's the vote we've just had, Dominic Grieve's amendment, Hilary Benn's amendment, is there's a battle going on between Parliament and the Executive, and for 2 years the Prime Minister and the Cabinet have been pushing away Parliament and saying we're not prepared to take your views really into account, and Parliament is now fighting back and saying I'm sorry, that's just not good enough. On an issue of this importance, the views of MPs have to be heard, and where there's a majority that's against the government, it has to speak.
I know you need to go and vote in a second, Sir Keir, but just one more if I can, which is to do with the 5 days of debate leading us up to next Tuesday. Are you detecting, outside party political obsessions, are you detecting any move, any shift in the mood of the House?
Well, there's great speculation about the numbers here in Parliament. I think everybody is assuming that the Prime Minister will struggle to win that vote next Tuesday. I'll wait and see. We'll keep making our arguments, but we need to wait until next Tuesday to know the answer to the question, has the Prime Minister's deal gone through or not? And if not, by how many has she lost the vote?
Sir Keir, we'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir Keir Starmer, the Shadow Brexit Secretary. Good evening to join us. And the division bells ringing. The vote's taking place once again, and we'll be keeping an eye on that tally when it comes up. I mentioned the former Conservative Attorney General Dominic Grieve because he, of course, has been outlining in the Commons the amendment that he is tabling, which, as I was explaining, would give MPs the opportunity to propose and vote on, I suppose, alternative outcomes if Mrs May's Brexit deal is voted down. And the vote on that amendment is the one, I think, taking place right now. This is what Mr Grieve had to say earlier.
In June, issues arose about how the House should proceed in the event of the government motion being rejected. And at that time, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, represented to me that if the motions were to be made amendable, the motions to be considered thereafter, it would in some way interfere with her ability to negotiate, which was why, having reflected on her view, I took the decision to vote against my own amendment when it was presented to this House, because I listened to what she had to say to me. But the reality remains that we have an unsatisfactory procedure to resolve differences of opinion in this House if, and obviously it's an if, we come to a point where the government does not succeed on its motion. And the opportunity exists this afternoon to cure that anomaly. And as was so rightly said by the Speaker for the Opposition, it is contrary to all sensible practice, and I have to say slightly disrespectful of the role of this House, that we should end up with a situation in which we have unamendable motions for consideration at a time when the Parliament ought to be fully focused on trying to find means of resolving outstanding issues. And it's for that reason, Mr Speaker, that I put forward this amendment, which would, in very simple terms, cure that problem and provide reassurance, even before we start on these really important debates, that whatever the outcome next week, we have a means of continuing the debate thereafter if we need to, in a way that must be in conformity with what any right-thinking member of this House would think to be the proper procedure and process to adopt.
That was the scene just a short while ago in the House of Commons. That was Dominic Grieve there, the Conservative former Attorney General, who has brought this extra motion, an amendment to a motion before the House today, because he wants in effect to change some of the rules of the House of Commons so that the House of Commons in certain circumstances can have a view on what's been proposed to it, rather than what we heard there earlier, a neutral kind of noting or a neutral acknowledgement, taking note of something, getting that out of the way so that in some circumstances the House can say, actually, we think this should happen. In other words, having a view on it. That's basically that's the direction of travel here. But what will happen in the vote? Let's have a look in the Commons now. The vote is taking place. Lots of MPs have been through the lobby already and they're now filing back into the chamber from the central lobby, which is nearest to us here, that entrance there, and then, of course, right to the back behind the Speaker's chair. They can come in through the lobbies there on either side, so the aye lobby and the no lobby. So as we look at these images, let me bring Vicky Young back in, my colleague Vicky Young, who's in the central lobby for us. Vicky, what's your take on what's been going on?
Well, this could be very significant, Hugh. Now, I know it sounds like procedure. I know it is there as a timetabling motion, not the kind of thing we would normally be that interested in. But this could be highly significant if Theresa May's deal and that vote next Tuesday goes against her, because this is a wrangle that's been going on really for months and months and months, and it's about what happens if the government can't get its vision of Brexit through. Who takes control in that circumstance, if you like? Now, what this amendment is trying to do is to say that if the deal next Tuesday, the government has 21 days to come back. It would come back, it would make a statement saying what it's going to do next, what its next steps are. What Dominic Grieve and others want is at that point for Parliament to be able to amend that motion, not simply accept it or reject it, to amend it and to give an indication of what they would like to happen next. So that's why it's pretty controversial. There are some on the Brexit side of the argument who feel that this is an attempt, or would be an attempt, to somehow soften Brexit or maybe even stop it completely and trying to get a vote through on something like another referendum, for example, or a different arrangement such as the UK staying in the European Economic Area. So this could be crucial if it comes to the stage where Theresa May can't get her version through. Now, I spoke to the DUP earlier. They, unlike the previous vote where the government was defeated, are going to back the government in all of this. But everyone's predicting it's going to be close, because I've spoken to several Conservative MPs this afternoon who are prepared to rebel against the government on all of this. Some of them, intriguingly, have said they haven't had that much attention from the party whips, and some of them are interpreting that as the government not being too bothered if this goes through or not. We'll have to wait and see, but a government defeat is never something that ministers would relish, and of course all this coming ahead of Theresa May standing up pretty soon to start making her case again to MPs to back her deal.
Some people characterising this particular vote, Vicky, as you say, the debate hasn't started yet, but some people characterising this vote as a kind of Parliament or House of Commons against the executive. Is that a fair characterisation?
Yeah, I mean, one senior Conservative backbencher put it to me like this earlier. He said, look, if we get to the stage where there's deadlock, so the deal fails, there's no obvious way through, there's no clear plan B, his feeling was that the front benches, so Jeremy Corbyn and his team, the ministerial team on Theresa May's side, that they wouldn't be prepared to work together to find a way through all this. But he thinks that there is a majority in the House of Commons for something like, for example, what they call the Norway option, the UK staying in the European Economic Area, for example. So he thinks that this is a way of MPs on the backbenches being able to work together and make it very clear to the government what they think should happen next, the next step. Now, there are some who are saying that actually, although this would be obviously very unfortunate for the government to lose a vote in this scenario, actually what it allows ministers to do is to say to the Brexiteers who are threatening to rebel next Tuesday, you know, hang on a minute, you've got to be careful what you wish for here. If you vote down Theresa May's deal, then you're adding to chaos and no one can predict what happens then. And one of the possibilities is that you end up with another referendum, or you end up with what they call a softer Brexit. So it just could focus the minds of those who want Brexit and they want it to happen and they want it to happen soon. It could focus their minds and get them behind Theresa May's deal. You never know. But it is, that's high stakes, I would say, for the government. It's very high stakes. We'll see whether those Conservative MPs I spoke to, there were 16 Tories who actually signed this Dominic Grieve amendment. That, another minister said to me, there were some others who were prepared to vote against the government. That might be enough, but it sounds like it's going to be pretty close.
You say high stakes, Vicky, and it was interesting, Karen Bradley talking to us a short while ago, really repeatedly urging colleagues of hers to spend time over the weekend, as she say, talk to your party officials locally, talk to your constituency workers, talk to people in your constituencies about what they want. In other words, it's a repeated appeal for people to think very carefully about the people at home, if you like, and what they want, away from the more tribal instincts at Westminster.
Yeah, and you can see why, because, you know, standing here today, it's been absolutely packed. Of course, all MPs are here on what's called a three-line whip. They have to be here on the parliamentary estate, ready to vote at any time. We've already had 2 government defeats this afternoon. You know, the atmosphere feels volatile, and I think they're trying to basically get MPs to look beyond this place, the Westminster Village as it's called, and to think more broadly about Brexit, about what it meant, what that referendum vote meant, to try and work out what's the best deal for their constituents. And if they were to speak to their business communities, then I think it's fair to say that many businesses will be saying to them, look, we desperately need some kind of certainty, and this deal would give them that certainty. And important to remember what else it gives them. It gives them this transition period of 20 months or so, which could be extended in order to prepare for what's coming next. And there are so many businesses around the country who say that. Now, for some Tories, that's not enough, because they just don't feel that this is Brexit. They think it's Brexit in name only. They don't think that it does reflect the referendum, because it leaves us too closely tied to the EU for far too long. So I think the appeal by ministers who are on board here is to say to them, go home and speak to those people whose livelihoods depend on there being a smooth trading relationship with the rest of the EU, for example. That's why a customs union, a customs arrangement is so important to them. They want them to think about that bigger picture. And I suppose the best that Theresa May can hope for at this point, given that almost 100 Tory MPs, almost a third of her party in Parliament have said that they will vote against her deal. What they're trying to do, I think, at this point is slightly damage limitation, is to get those numbers down to a point where they might be able to bring it back for another vote later on, maybe having gone back to the EU. That's certainly what some Brexiteers are saying. They're saying it's going to be defeated on Tuesday. They feel she can then go back to the EU, go back to Brussels and say, look, that is the strength of opinion in the House of Commons. It doesn't go through. It didn't go through mainly because of this idea of the backstop, because it keeps us too closely aligned. It treats Northern Ireland differently from the rest of the UK. It's just not going to go through. You've got to somehow try and change that. Now, that is quite a big ask, and people in Brussels say it's simply not going to happen. But that is what some Brexiteers think is going to happen. On the other side of the argument, those in the Labour Party and others who want some of them to stay in the EU and are pushing for another referendum, they think that if this amendment goes through this afternoon, it gives them a better chance of getting that ultimate aim. I mean, it certainly means if the deal is voted down next Tuesday, no one can see a clear way through, and that is what this amendment is trying to deal with, to say that Parliament can be much more in the driving seat and make clear its opinion on what should happen next.
Just bear with us, Vicky, because I'm just going to tell those viewers joining us, it is 5:41 here on BBC News. We are live in the House of Commons for yet another significant vote. Before this Brexit debate gets underway, we have 5 days of debate on Theresa May's Brexit plans ahead of us. The Prime Minister will open that debate. It should have been starting a few hours ago, really, according to the traditional Commons timetable. It has not, because there have been several significant votes taking place. In one of them, the government has been forced to publish its legal advice on Brexit in full. It didn't want to do that, but it's been forced to do so by the House, so that is a very, very significant development indeed, and could have a big impact on that Brexit vote next Tuesday. And now this vote that we're waiting for is on an amendment, if you like, to the